What if the kindest person you know felt absolutely nothing inside? Stop for a moment. Think about that always polite colleague, in that incredibly attentive partner, in that friend who seems too balanced for this chaotic world. Now imagine that, behind from that calm look, there is no empathy, there is no guilt, there is no remorse. There's something disturbingly fascinating about people who never lose control. They don't explode, they don't cry in public, they do not show insecurity. They seem stable, reliable, strong. But what if this stability is not maturity, but emotional absence? Psychopathy rarely looks like graphic violence. She doesn't come screaming. There is no dramatic soundtrack. She often arrives smiling. Studies in forensic psychology show that one of the most striking characteristics of functional psychopath is the ability to perfectly simulate normality. They learn to observe, copying, reproducing emotions they've never felt. They know exactly when to smile. They know when to tilt their head as a sign of empathy. They know when to touch your shoulder, but they don't feel any of that. The most uncomfortable thing is not imagining a cruel criminal. The most uncomfortable thing is realize that many psychopaths will never commit a crime. They work. They have a family. They attend social events. They are described as incredible people. And that's exactly what makes them invisible. Because we expect evil to have a deformed face. We wait for cold eyes and strange behavior. But the true social predator understands one simple rule. The more normal you look, the further you can go. They don't reveal themselves in the first conversation. They build trust, create connection, identify vulnerabilities, and they wait. Silently. If you've ever felt like someone seemed too normal, maybe this video will help you understand why. Why? There is an almost imperceptible detail that differentiates a person emotionally healthy of someone who just imitates emotions. And when you learn to see this detail, certain memories begin to make sense. That apology that seemed rehearsed, that coldness in moments of pain, that frightening ability to move on as if nothing had happened. Maybe it was never maturity. Maybe it was absence. But how does one learn to appear so human without actually being one? What happens inside the mind of a person who observes feelings like someone study a foreign language? And even more disturbing, have you ever deeply trusted someone like that? There is a comfortable myth that most people prefer to believe. Psychopaths are easily identifiable. He would be aggressive, strange, intimidating. Something in the look would betray his nature. But the reality is much more disconcerting. Most functional psychopaths have mastered the art of social adaptation. They watch human patterns as scientists studying animal behavior, learn which one's reactions generate acceptance, which phrases produce trust, what expressions convey empathy, and then they reproduce. It's not emotion, it's strategy. From an early age, many realize that they are different. While other children cry when they see someone hurt, they feel curious. While colleagues show guilt after lie, they feel only irritation at being discovered. But they realize something crucial. Showing certain emotions makes coexistence easier. Then they start training. They watch films. They imitate friends. They memorize socially appropriate responses, create a functional character. This is the mask. And the more it is reinforced over the years, the more convincing it becomes. In adult life, this translates into something impressive. Controlled charisma. They listen. They know how to praise. They know how to make you feel special, but this attention is never free. It's calculation. Psychopaths don't connect emotionally. They connect strategically. In romantic relationships, they may seem too intense at first. Gifts frequent, quick statements, a feeling that you finally found someone different. But there is a subtle detail. The emotional depth is shallow. When a problem arises real, something fails. The emotional response seems slightly off. A delay in reaction, an expression that does not match the context. In the professional environment, they are often described as natural leaders. They talk to security. They take risks without hesitation, remain calm under pressure. But what looks like courage may simply be the absence of fear. What seems cold-blooded may be an inability to feel anxiety in the same way as the others. They understand emotions intellectually. They know what sadness is. They know what guilt is. They know how these emotions work in others. But within them, these experiences are superficial or non-existent, and this creates a silent advantage. Because while you hesitate out of empathy, they move forward. While you worry about emotional consequences, they calculate benefits. While you suffer with guilt, they just adjust their strategy. The most disturbing thing is that many victims don't realize it right away. The mask is consistent, rehearsed, refined over years, and when they finally notice something strange, they are already too emotionally involved to come out easily. Maybe you've already felt this. A conversation where everything seemed perfect, but there was a void that was difficult to explain, a look that seemed too attentive, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The perfect social mask doesn't fail in big explosions. It fails in the micro details. But if they don't feel like we do, if they don't experience guilt or empathy in the same way, what exactly happens inside their brain? And how is it possible for someone to learn to imitate emotions so accurately without ever really live them? To understand how someone can imitate emotions without feeling them, we need to get into an uncomfortable territory: the brain. There is a small, deep, silent structure called the amygdala. She is responsible for processing fear, emotional empathy, and automatic responses to suffering alien. In emotionally healthy people, this region activates when we see someone cry, when we witness pain, when we feel guilt. But in many individuals with psychopathic traits, neuroimaging studies show something different. Activity there is reduced. It's not a total absence. It's a decrease, a weakened response. Imagine watching a sad scene and feeling just a faint echo where there should be an impact. Now imagine living like this all the time, without that tightness in the chest, without that moral discomfort, without that anguish that prevents you from crossing certain limits. This does not mean that the psychopath does not understand social rules. On the contrary, he understands perfectly what is right and wrong in rational terms. The problem is not an intellectual understanding. It's in the emotional experience. They know that hurting someone is wrong, but they don't feel the emotional weight of this action. And this difference is gigantic. Because our moral decisions are not guided by logic alone. They are guided by internal discomfort we feel when imagining causing pain. Without this discomfort, the calculus changes. Empathy has two layers: cognitive empathy, which is the ability to understand what the other is feeling, and emotional empathy, which is feeling together. The psychopath usually has the first, but it lacks the second. He notices that you are sad, recognizes body signals, identify the tone of voice. But this does not generate internal resonance. It doesn't create a real connection. It's like watching a documentary about distant suffering. You understand, but it doesn't hurt. This explains the coldness at critical moments. While most people get into panic, feels guilt or anxiety, the psychopath maintains stability, not because it's more strong, but because the emotional system that produces this turbulence is different. This difference also changes the way fear is experienced. Fear in levels moderates protects us. It makes us retreat. It makes us reconsider risks. With reduced emotional response, certain behaviors become easier. Lie without trembling, handle without hesitation, discard someone without suffering. But an intriguing question arises. If they don't feel how we feel, how can they imitate so accurately? The answer starts with observation. Children with psychopathic traits often find that their reactions are not correspond to social expectations. They notice punishments, they notice disapproval, then they learn. If crying generates comfort, they learn to simulate tears. If demonstrating regret avoids consequences, they learn to construct requests for convincing excuses. It's behavioral learning. It is not spontaneous emotion. Over time, imitation becomes sophisticated. Adjust micro-expressions, sync body posture. They improve the timing of the response. It is strategic action. But every performance has small flaws, and it is in these microseconds that the mask shakes. If something here starts to make sense to you, stick with it until the end. What's next? It can change the way you observe people, because if their brain works differently, If they learned to copy feelings like someone learning a language, what are the almost invisible signs that reveal when we are in front of someone who doesn't just represent emotions? What you are about to understand now is uncomfortable. Psychopaths are not born knowing how to manipulate. They learn, and they learn quickly. From a very early age, they realize that there are invisible rules in human coexistence. Rules emotional, expected expressions, reactions that generate approval, and others that generate punishment. While most children feel guilt naturally, some only notice external sequences. There is no real internal pain. There is only calculation. If I do this, I will be punished. If I feign repentance, I will be forgiven. This difference changes everything, because motivation stops being moral and becomes strategic. Over time, they develop an impressive skill, behavioral reading. Observe patterns of fragility. They identify insecurities, detect deficiencies emotions with almost surgical precision. They ask the right questions. They listen with calculated attention. Memorize details that you yourself have forgotten, not because they care, but because information is power. In the loving environment, training appears as initial intensity. The calling, emotional bombardment, constant messages, very quick future plans. One feeling of deep connection that feels like magic. But there is something strange. The connection seems too perfect, too adapted to what you want to hear. They don't show who they are. They show you what you need to see. If you value stability, they become stable. If you value adventure, become bold. If you seek understanding, become attentive listeners. It's a sophisticated mirroring. And when you finally let your guard down, the real game begins. Small manipulations, subtle distortions of reality, almost imperceptible version changes. If confronted, they rarely explode. They prefer to invert, question your memory, suggest that you misinterpreted, and they do it with serenity, because they're not as emotionally activated as you are. In the professional environment, training takes another form. Functional psychopaths. They tend to thrive where cool decisions are valued, take risks that others avoid. They make unpopular decisions without internal suffering. They can fire someone without emotional weight. They can lie strategically without anxiety. They can betray alliances without remorse, and they are often rewarded for it. But the most disturbing point is this: they learn from every interaction. If a failed manipulation, adjust. If a lie is almost discovered, they refine the next one. It is continuous behavioral evolution, like a predator that adapts its hunting technique. And there is a specific moment when the mask starts to slip, not in big explosions, but in moments of other people's vulnerability. When someone cries deeply, when someone suffers a real loss, when someone has an emotional breakdown. In these moments, their response may seem slightly off. Not cruel, just inadequate. Too cold advice. A rush to move on, an absence of emotional resonance. That's where the difference appears. If you're starting to recognize patterns, stay tuned. What's next? It can permanently change the way you observe relationships. Because social predator training is not perfect. There are signs, microfaults, small voids, but they are too subtle for those who still believe that every sincere smile comes accompanied by true empathy. Then the inevitable question arises. If they learn to copy emotions, if they know how to simulate regret, affection, and concern, how can we identify and practice the almost invisible signs that reveal when does anyone just interpret feelings? And even more disturbing, have these signs already appeared in your life, and you chose to ignore them? Now we come to the most delicate part. Because identifying a psychopath is not about great acts. It's about microscopic details. The first sign is rarely aggression. It's subtle emotional inconsistency. Watch the timing. When someone receives sad news, there is a natural microsecond of impact. One minimum delay before verbal response. The brain processes, the emotion arises, the body reacts. In many high-functioning psychopaths, this sequence may seem rehearsed. The answer comes too fast, or too perfectly formulated. I'm very sorry. I can imagine how difficult it must be. I'm here for you. Correct sentences, but the look doesn't follow. There is an almost imperceptible disconnect between word and micro-expression. Another sign is coldness in crisis situations. While most feel anxiety, guilt, or fear of losing reputation, they demonstrate extreme stability. But it is not emotional maturity. It is the absence of internal turmoil. They don't need to calm down, because they never really got excited. There is also the instrumental charm. Psychopaths know how to be charming when it gives them an advantage. But the charm disappears when there is no clear benefit. Attention decreases. Interest evaporates. You can notice this in cycles. Intensity phase, distancing phase, strategic return phase. Nothing is spontaneous. Everything is functional. Another important detail is the absence of genuine guilt. When they make mistakes, they tend to focus on the consequences for themselves, not in the damage caused. The apology is accompanied by subtle justifications. I did that's because you provoked me. You got it wrong. I was under pressure. There is no deep emotional responsibility. There is strategic repositioning. There is also the ease of discarding people. Relationships that end abruptly. Friendships that disappear without explanation. Radical changes in posture as if the previous bond had never existed. For those who feel empathy, ruptures leave marks. For those who don't feel the same way, they are just transitions. An even more subtle sign is the ability to maintain parallel stories without burnout. Emotional. Complex lies require psychological energy when there is fear of being discovered. But if the fear is reduced, so is the weight. They can sustain different versions with impressive naturalness. And perhaps the most unsettling point is this. You often feel something strange before, to be able to explain. A slight discomfort. A silent intuition. A feeling that something doesn't quite fit. But since there is no concrete proof, you ignore it. Because he is polite. Because she is competent. Because everyone likes him. Because no one suspects her. Functional psychopaths survive in the doubt zone. They don't look dangerous. They look too good. And that brings us to an even more disturbing question. What if they are not rare? What if part of society rewards exactly these traits? What if competitive, corporate, and even family environments favor people who, do they feel less guilt, less fear, and less empathy? If that's true, maybe the problem isn't just them. Maybe it's in the structure that allows them to thrive. But how common is this really? Are they rare exceptions, or are they much closer than we imagine? There is a statistic that is rarely mentioned outside of academic circles. It is estimated that around 1% of the population presents clinical psychopathic traits. Can seem little. But when we talk about subclinical traits, lighter, more functional versions, and socially adapted, the number grows. And it grows a lot. We're not just talking about criminals. We are talking about people who learn to use emotional coldness as a competitive advantage. Highly competitive environments tend to reward certain characteristics. Boldness, extreme, lack of fear, ruthless decision-making, ability to fire without hesitation, ability to lie strategically. Traits that, in excess, come close to functional psychopathy. In large corporations, for example, leaders who are unfazed by suffering can rise quickly, because difficult decisions require distance emotional, and those who feel less, suffer less. But there is an invisible line between resilience and lack of empathy, and it's not always clear. In family contexts, the scenario can be even more confusing. The functional psychopath does not. It needs to be violent. It might just be controlling. You can use guilt as a tool, can create silent emotional dependence. No screaming, no scandals, just subtle manipulation. They know exactly what to say to undermine your trust. Know how to switch affection and coldness to keep you emotionally trapped. And they do it calmly, because they are not emotionally involved in the same way that you are. Another disturbing point is the capacity for social adaptation. Functional psychopaths. They quickly learn which behaviors are valued in each environment. At work, they are strategic and rational. In the family, they may appear responsible and helpful. In public, they display calculated generosity. It is a modular identity. The question that bothers you is this: How many people around you operate like this? Maybe not as extreme villains, but as individuals who feel less than demonstrate. This doesn't mean everyone around you is dangerous, but it means that psychopathy is not always a cinematic caricature. It is often silent, adapted, socially integrated, and most uncomfortable of all. They can occupy positions of power because the absence of guilt facilitates cold decisions, absence of fear facilitates high risks, lack of empathy facilitates deep cuts. Society in certain contexts can reward exactly these characteristics, and this creates a disturbing paradox. What scares us morally can be, at the same time, functional within competitive systems. Maybe you've already worked with someone like this, someone incredibly competent, impressively confident, but too emotionally distant, someone who seemed immune to collective suffering, and you might have called it professionalism. But there is a subtle difference between emotional balance and emotional emptiness, and this difference is rarely discussed, because admitting this requires accepting something uncomfortable. Evil is not always on the margins of society. Sometimes it is integrated into it, but if they are adaptable here, socially functional and even admired, if they can thrive in competitive environments, what does this reveal about human nature? And the most disturbing question of all, is what really protects us from evil is morality, or just our own morality? Ability to feel? Perhaps the most disturbing thing is not the existence of psychopaths. Perhaps the most disturbing thing is realizing that the difference between us and them is not in the intelligence, not even in appearance, not even in professional success. It's in the ability to feel. Empathy is not just a beautiful quality. It's a break. It is discomfort that prevents certain decisions. It is guilt that makes us repair mistakes. It is pain that connects us to suffering alien. Without it, the world becomes a board. People turn into plays. Relationships become opportunities. Promises become tools. And yet, many of these individuals walk among us without ever being unmasked. Because we learn to value performance above emotional depth, we admire coldness as strength. We call indifference maturity. We confuse lack of emotion with balance. But there is a difference, and this difference defines who builds it and who just uses it. Throughout this video, you may have remembered someone. Maybe you felt a slight shiver when connecting certain behaviors. Perhaps you noticed that some past experiences finally make sense. The question now is not just about them, it's about you. Do you recognize the value of your own sensitivity? Do you understand that feeling pain for others is what keeps the world from becoming a cold game? If this content made you think differently about the human mind, sign up. Here we explore what almost no one wants to see. And before you leave, respond in the comments. Do you believe you've ever lived with someone who seemed too good to be true? Or do you think we are surrounded by masks that are more fragile than we imagine? Perhaps the scariest thing is not that they exist. Perhaps we will never know, with complete certainty, who is really behind a too calm smile.